The twin suns of Prime burned hot and orange in the sky. They cast long shadows across the endless desert that covered most of the planet. The sand here was not like Earth sand. It was harder, more like tiny crystals, and it sparkled in the sunlight like a sea of broken glass. Nothing grew here. Nothing moved except the wind and the creatures who called this harsh world home. The people had lived on Prime for more than 50,000 years. They were tall beings, covered in thick scales that protected them from the brutal heat. They had 4 arms, 2 legs, and long tails that helped them balance when they ran across the dunes. Their eyes were large and dark, designed to see in both the blinding daylight and the cold darkness of night. They were proud people with ancient traditions and strict rules about how life should be lived. The breeding grounds lay in a valley between 2 massive dunes. This was sacred land to the... For thousands of generations, mothers had come here to lay their eggs in the warm sand. They would wait for their clutches to hatch, then judge which of their offspring were worthy of life. This was the way of things. This had always been the way of things. On this particular day, 37 eggs had hatched in the eastern section of the breeding grounds. A female named watched as her children broke free from their shells one by one. She counted them carefully. 8 healthy hatchlings, all with proper green and brown scales, all with strong limbs and clear dark eyes. She felt pride swelling in her chest as she gathered them close. Then she saw the 9th one. It had emerged from its shell last, struggling where its siblings had pushed through easily. When it finally broke free and lay gasping in the sand, felt her pride turn to ice in her stomach. The hatchling was white, pure, pale white from the tip of its snout to the end of its tail. Its eyes, when they opened, were not the proper dark color of a healthy. They were pink, like the inside of a wound. An albino stepped back from the creature as if it carried disease. Around her, other mothers who had been watching their own clutches turned to stare. Whispers spread through the breeding grounds like wind across the dunes. "Sun-cursed," someone hissed. "Contaminated," another agreed. "It should not have hatched at all." The albino hatchling did not understand any of this. It was only minutes old, still wet from the fluid inside its egg, still learning how to use its 4 small arms and 2 small legs. It looked around at the world with wonder, seeing shapes and colors and movement for the first time. It saw its mother standing a few feet away and instinctively reached out toward her. Turned her back. "I have 8 healthy children," she announced to the others. "I have only 8 children." She gathered her proper offspring and walked away. The albino hatchling tried to follow, but its legs were too weak and unsteady. It fell face first into the sand and let out a small cry of distress. No one came to help it. The elders arrived an hour later. 3 ancient with faded scales and wise eyes came to inspect the new generation, as was their duty. They counted the healthy hatchlings and noted which mothers had produced the best clutches. They recorded everything in their memory, as their kind had done for thousands of years before the invention of writing. When they came to the albino, they stopped. Elder was the oldest of the 3. He had seen more than 200 cycles of the suns, and he had witnessed many things in his long life. But he still felt disgust when he looked at the pale creature lying alone in the sand. "Another sun-cursed one," he said, "the 3rd this season." Elder, who was younger than by nearly 50 cycles, tilted her head as she studied the hatchling. "It seems strong enough otherwise. Good limb development, proper scale formation apart from the color." "The color is everything," replied sharply. "You know the teachings, the sun-cursed are born without the ability to hold the light of our suns. Their souls are damaged, incomplete. They can never be true." "I know the teachings," said quietly. She did not argue further. The 3rd elder, a male named, made a dismissive gesture with his upper arms. "Leave it. The suns will take it soon enough. There is no need to waste our time discussing the matter." They walked away, continuing their inspection of the breeding grounds. Behind them, the albino hatchling watched them go with its strange pink eyes. It did not understand why everyone kept leaving. It did not understand why no one would touch it or feed it or give it water. It only knew that it was alone and afraid and that something was very, very wrong. Hours passed. The twin suns moved across the sky, their heat growing more intense as midday approached. The other hatchlings had all been taken to the nursery caves where it was cool and dark and safe. They would be fed and cared for and taught the ways of their people. They would grow up to be hunters and builders and mothers and fathers. They would have lives. The albino hatchling stayed in the sand. It tried to move several times, dragging itself toward the shade of a nearby rock, but its strength was fading quickly. No one had given it food or water since it hatched. Its pale skin, which lacked the protective pigments of normal scales, was already starting to burn under the harsh sunlight. Every movement hurt. Every breath was harder than the last. By the time the suns began to set, the hatchling had stopped trying to move. It lay in a small hollow it had managed to dig in the sand, its eyes half closed, its body limp. It was dying. Some deep instinct told it this truth, even though it had no words to describe what death meant. It was simply going away, fading like the light on the horizon. It thought about its mother, though it did not know that word either. It thought about the large female who had looked at it with such coldness before turning away. It wondered if it had done something wrong. It wondered if there was something it could do to make her come back. There was nothing. There had never been anything. The hatchling's only crime was being born different, and for that crime its people had sentenced it to death. Night fell on Prime. The twin suns disappeared below the horizon, and the temperature dropped rapidly. The desert, which had been burning hot during the day, became bitter cold within hours. This was another danger the hatchling faced. Without shelter and without the body heat of siblings pressed close, it would freeze long before the suns rose again. The hatchling closed its eyes and waited for the end. 3 kilometers away, the human research outpost glowed with soft, artificial light. It was a small facility, just a collection of prefabricated buildings surrounded by a low wall to keep out the sand storms. The Galactic Council had authorized its construction 5 years ago, when humanity first made contact with the people. The official purpose was geological research, studying the unique mineral formations of Prime. The unofficial purpose was to establish a peaceful presence on an alien world and learn about its inhabitants. 6 humans lived and worked in the outpost. There was Doctor, the team leader, a no-nonsense woman from Texas who had spent 20 years studying before being assigned to this mission. There was Lisa Park, whose job was to understand the biology of Prime's native species. There was Carlos, the engineer who kept all the equipment running. There were 2 research assistants named Amy, and there was Danny. Danny was 28 years old, a geologist from a small town in Nevada. He had grown up in the desert, surrounded by rocks and sand and empty spaces. When he was a child, he used to wander for hours through the wilderness behind his family's house, collecting interesting stones and imagining what ancient secrets they might hold. That childhood fascination had led him to study geology in college, then to a job with the Galactic Survey Corps, and finally to this distant world where the sands sparkled like diamonds. He loved it here despite the hardships. The isolation did not bother him. The harsh environment felt almost like home, and the work was genuinely interesting, uncovering the secrets of a planet that no human had ever seen before. Most days, Danny felt like the luckiest man alive. Today, however, he was feeling restless. It was supply day, which meant someone had to drive the crawler out to the landing zone to meet the shuttle. The landing zone was about 40 kilometers away, too far for the shuttle to land near the outpost without disturbing the local wildlife. So every month, one of the team members made the long drive through the desert to collect their supplies. This month, it was Danny's turn. He did not mind the duty. In fact, he had volunteered for it. The drive was long and boring, yes, but it also meant 6 hours alone with his thoughts and the alien landscape. He could play music as loud as he wanted, talk to himself without anyone thinking he was crazy, and just enjoy the solitude. The crawler was a large vehicle, designed for rough terrain and extreme temperatures. It had 6 wheels, each one as tall as a man, and a pressurized cabin that could keep its passengers comfortable in almost any environment. Danny climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The machine hummed to life beneath him, a familiar sound that always made him smile. "I'm heading out," he announced over the radio. "Should be back by midnight." "Drive safe," his voice crackled back, "and try not to hit any rocks this time." Danny laughed. That was one time and it wasn't my fault. Sure it wasn't. See you tonight. He guided the crawler through the outpost gates and out into the open desert. The twin suns had already set, but the sky was still light, painted in shades of orange and purple that no Earth sunset could match. Danny watched the colors shift and change as he drove, grateful for the beauty of this strange world. The crawler's navigation system kept him on course, avoiding the worst of the dunes and rocky outcrops. Danny's job was mostly to supervise, making sure the machine did not make any mistakes that could leave him stranded in the middle of nowhere. It was not exciting work, but it required attention. That was why he noticed when the thermal scanner beeped. Danny glanced at the display, frowning. The scanner was designed to detect heat signatures, useful for avoiding wildlife that might damage the crawler. But the signature it was showing now was strange. Too small to be an adult, too far from any known settlement to make sense. And fatting fast, which suggested that whatever it was dying. He checked the coordinates. The signal was coming from about 2 kilometers to the east, well off his planned route. If he went to investigate, it would add at least an hour to his trip. Would not be happy about the delay. Danny stared at the fatting heat signature on his screen. It was probably nothing. A small animal, maybe, or a malfunction in the scanner. There was no logical reason for him to go out of his way to check on it. But something in his gut would not let him ignore it. "Damn it," he muttered and turned the crawler east. The terrain became rougher as he approached the signal's location. The crawler's suspension groaned as it climbed over ridges and dipped into valleys. Danny kept his eyes on the scanner, watching the heat signature grow closer and closer. It was definitely there, definitely real, and definitely getting weaker by the minute. Finally, he crested a small dune and saw it. At first, Danny did not understand what he was looking at. The creature lying in the sand was clearly but it was unlike any he had ever seen. It was tiny, barely larger than a human baby, and it was completely white. Its scales, which should have been green or brown or some combination of the two, were pale as snow. Even from a distance, Danny could see that it was in terrible condition. He stopped the crawler and climbed out, his boots crunching on the crystalline sand. The cold night air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. All his attention was focused on the small creature before him. The hatchling's eyes opened when it heard him approach. Those eyes were pink, not dark, and they looked up at Danny with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The creature tried to move, tried to lift its head, but it was too weak. A small sound escaped its throat, a whimper that needed no translation. Danny's heart broke in his chest. He had read the cultural briefings about He knew about their breeding practices, their strict traditions, their religious beliefs about purity and worth. He understood, in an abstract way, that they sometimes left imperfect offspring to die in the desert. It was one of those facts that seemed unreal until you were confronted with the reality of it. Now, looking down at this dying child, Danny felt a wave of anger so intense it made his hands shake. This was someone's baby. Someone had looked at this tiny creature and decided it did not deserve to live. Someone had walked away and left it here to suffer and die alone, all because of the color of its skin. Danny knelt in the sand, moving slowly so as not to frighten the hatchling further. He could see now how badly it was hurt. Its pale skin was red and blistered from the sun. Its body was shrunken with dehydration. Its breathing was shallow and labored, each breath a struggle. "Hey there," Danny said softly. His voice was gentle, the same tone he used when talking to frightened animals back home. "Hey, little one, I'm not going to hurt you." The hatchling watched him with those strange pink eyes. It did not try to run or fight. It was too weak for either. It simply waited to see what this strange creature would do. Danny thought about the regulations. He knew he was not supposed to interfere with local customs. He knew that taking this hatchling could cause diplomatic problems between humans and... He knew that the smart thing, the safe thing, the professional thing would be to walk away and let nature take its course. He thought about all of that for about 3 seconds. Then he took off his jacket, wrapped it carefully around the hatchling's fragile body, and lifted it gently into his arms. The creature weighed almost nothing. It was so light, so frail, that Danny was afraid he might break it just by holding it. He could feel its heart beating rapidly against his chest, a tiny drum of life that refused to stop playing. "I've got you," Danny whispered. "I've got you, you're going to be okay." He carried the hatchling back to the crawler and climbed inside. The cabin was warm compared to the freezing desert night, and he could feel the creature relax slightly in his arms. He found a space behind the driver's seat where he could make a nest of emergency blankets, somewhere soft and warm where the hatchling could rest. When he set it down, the creature made another small sound. This one was different from the whimper before. It almost sounded like gratitude. Danny looked at the tiny white face, at the pink eyes that were still watching him with that mixture of fear and hope, and he made a silent promise. He did not know if the hatchling could understand him. He did not know if it would survive the night. But he spoke the words anyway because they needed to be said. "I'm going to take care of you," he said. "I'm going to keep you safe, and no one is ever going to leave you alone in the sand again. I promise." The hatchling blinked slowly, as if considering his words. Then, for the first time since it had hatched, it closed its eyes and truly slept. Danny returned to the driver's seat and turned the crawler around. The supply run would have to wait. Right now, all that mattered was getting this child back to the outpost where Lisa could examine it and could yell at him, and everyone could figure out what to do next. As he drove through the darkness, Danny thought about his grandmother. She had died when he was 15, but he still remembered her stories about the old country, about the war, about the camps where so many of her family had perished. She used to tell him about a woman named, a neighbor who had hidden his grandmother in her basement for 6 months when the soldiers came looking. That woman had risked her own life to save a stranger's child, simply because she believed it was the right thing to do. "Every life is precious," his grandmother used to say, "and kindness is never wrong no matter what the cost." Danny had not thought about those words in years. But now, with a dying alien child bundled in blankets behind him, they came back to him with perfect clarity. He pressed down on the accelerator and drove faster. The outpost appeared on the horizon just after midnight. Danny had pushed the crawler to its limits, cutting his travel time almost in half. He could see lights in several windows, which meant people were still awake. Good. He was going to need help. He pulled through the gates and parked in the vehicle bay. Before he even shut off the engine, he was already on the radio. "I need you in the med bay right now, and get Lisa too." There was a pause, then his voice came back, sharp with concern. "Danny, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "It's not me. Just get to the med bay. I'm bringing someone in." He gathered the hatchling in his arms, blankets and all, and hurried into the outpost. The corridors were empty at this hour, which was a small blessing. He did not want to explain himself until he absolutely had to. The med bay was a small room near the center of the facility. It was designed to handle minor injuries and illnesses, not serious medical emergencies, but it was the best they had. Danny laid the hatchling on the examination table just as Lisa burst through the door. Both women stopped dead when they saw what was lying on the table. "What the hell," breathed. Lisa pushed past her and immediately began examining the creature. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs and scanning for injuries. Her face grew more serious with every passing second. "Hatchling," she said. "Albino, severely dehydrated, malnourished, sun damage to approximately 40% of the skin surface. Early stage organ failure." She looked up at Danny. "Where did you find this?" "About 20 kilometers east, just lying in the sand, alone." "It was abandoned?" asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Danny nodded. "They left it to die because it's albino. I couldn't just leave it there." Closed her eyes and pressed a hand to her forehead. Danny could almost see her calculating the diplomatic nightmare that was about to unfold. They were protective of their customs. They did not appreciate outsiders interfering in their affairs, and what Danny had done was about the biggest interference imaginable. But when opened her eyes again, there was no anger in them, only a weary kind of acceptance. "Lisa, can you save it?" "I don't know. Physiology is similar to reptiles, but there are significant differences. I'll have to improvise." She was already gathering supplies, pulling out IV bags and medications and equipment that Danny did not recognize. I need everyone out, now, and someone bring me every piece of medical data we have. Danny did not want to leave. He wanted to stay and help, wanted to make sure the hatchling was going to be okay. But he knew he would only be in the way. I'll get the data, he said, and then I'm coming back. Grabbed his arm as he turned to go. Danny, you know there are going to be consequences for this. I know. The council is going to be furious. They might demand we hand the child over. They might cut off all contact with us. This could set back years of work. I know, Danny said again. But I couldn't leave it there. I couldn't walk away and let a baby die just because its skin is the wrong color. What kind of person would that make me? Looked at him for a long moment. Then, to Danny's surprise, she smiled. The same thing happened to Lisa's grandmother, you know, during the refugee crisis back on Earth. Someone saved her when everyone else had given up. She let go of his arm. Go get that data, and when you come back, you'd better be ready to help. We've got a lot of work to do. Danny ran. The next 12 hours were the longest of his life. He brought Lisa everything she asked for, data files and equipment and supplies that had never been meant for this purpose. He watched as she worked with desperate concentration, adapting human medical techniques for biology, making educated guesses when the data was insufficient. The hatchling's condition was critical. Several times its vital signs dropped so low that Danny was certain they had lost it. But each time, Lisa managed to bring it back. She was brilliant, tireless, and absolutely determined not to let this child die. Come on, she muttered, adjusting an IV drip that she had rigged from human glucose solution and compatible nutrients. Come on, little one, fight for me. Danny stayed by the examination table through the night. He held the hatchling's small hand when it seemed distressed, spoke to it softly when it whimpered in pain. He did not know if the creature understood him. He did not care. He just wanted it to know that someone was there. As dawn approached, something changed. The hatchling's breathing grew stronger. Its vital signs stabilized. The fever that had been burning through its small body finally began to break. Lisa sat back in her chair and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. It's going to make it, she said. Against all odds, this stubborn little thing is going to survive. Danny felt tears streaming down his face. He did not bother to wipe them away. Thank you, he whispered. He was not sure if he was talking to Lisa or to whatever force in the universe had brought him to that spot in the desert at exactly the right moment. The hatchling's eyes opened. Those strange pink eyes looked up at Danny with something that might have been recognition. Its tiny hand squeezed his finger weakly. And for the first time since it had hatched into a world that did not want it, the small white creature was safe. Called a team meeting that afternoon. Everyone gathered in the common room, exhausted and anxious, waiting to hear what would happen next. First of all, said, I want to commend Danny for his actions last night. What he did was risky and it may cause us some serious problems. But it was also the right thing to do, and I'm proud to have him on this team. Danny felt his face flush with embarrassment. Around him, his teammates nodded in agreement. Even Carlos, who usually complained about anything that disrupted routine, gave him a thumbs up. That said, continued, we need to be prepared for the consequences, though we'll find out about this sooner or later. When they do, they're going to have opinions, strong opinions. Let them, Amy said fiercely. The young research assistant had been outraged when she learned about this treatment of albino hatchlings. What they do to those bobbies is wrong. Someone needs to tell them that. That's not our place, replied, though her voice was gentle. We're guests on their planet. We don't get to judge their culture or tell them how to live. But we also don't have to participate in their cruelty, added. Danny didn't take the child to make a political statement. He did it to save a life. That's different. The debate continued for another hour, but in the end, everyone agreed on the basic facts. The hatchling was here now. They were not going to give it back to die. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Over the following days, the hatchling grew stronger. Lisa monitored its recovery with obsessive attention, documenting everything in case the information proved useful for future medical emergencies. The creature was remarkably resilient, bouncing back from near death with a speed that surprised everyone. Danny spent every spare moment in the med bay. He talked to the hatchling even though it could not understand him. He brought it food and water, carefully prepared according to Lisa's specifications. He made sure its bedding was always clean and comfortable. He did all the things that its own mother should have done. The creature began to respond to him. It would make small sounds when he entered the room, chirps and clicks that seemed to express excitement or contentment. It would reach for him with its 4 small hands, wanting to be held. It would fall asleep pressed against his chest, as if his heartbeat was the most comforting sound in the world. "You've bonded with it," Lisa observed one evening. "In culture, that kind of bond usually forms between hatchlings and their mothers. You've basically become its parent." Danny looked down at the sleeping creature in his arms. He had not thought about it in those terms before, but Lisa was right. Somewhere in the past few days, this tiny white alien had become his child. "I guess I have," he said softly. "Is that a problem?" "Not for me, but for the," Lisa shrugged. "That's going to complicate things." "Everything about this is complicated." "True, but some complications are worth it." She smiled and left him alone with the hatchling. Danny sat there in the quiet of the med bay, holding the small, warm body against his chest, and wondered what the future would bring. The answer came sooner than anyone expected. On the 5th day after the rescue, a message arrived at the outpost. It was formal, official, and absolutely terrifying. The council had learned about the albino hatchling. They were sending a delegation to discuss the matter. The delegation would arrive tomorrow at dawn. Called another emergency meeting. This time the mood was tense. "They know," she said simply. "I don't know how they found out, but they know. 5 elders are coming here to discuss the situation. I think we all know what that means." "They want the kid back," Carlos said grimly. "Probably. They're going to argue that we had no right to interfere. They're going to cite their traditions and their laws and their sovereignty. And technically, they'll be correct." "We can't give it to them," Danny said. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "You know what they'll do." "I know, but we may not have a choice. If we refuse, we could be expelled from the planet. We could damage human relations for generations. This is bigger than one life, Danny." "No," Danny stood up, and something in his posture made everyone else in the room fall silent. "No, nothing is bigger than one life. The moment we start believing that, we've lost something important, something that makes us human." He looked around at his teammates, at these people who had become his family over the past months. "I know there might be consequences. I know we might lose everything we've worked for here. But I will not hand that child over to be killed. If the council wants to expel us, fine. If they want to cut off contact, fine. I'll deal with those consequences, but I will not participate in the murder of a baby." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Amy stood up and moved to stand beside Danny. "Neither will I," she said. "Stood up, me either." One by one, every member of the team rose to their feet. Even Carlos, grumbling about how this was going to cause nothing but trouble. Was the last. She looked at her team, at these stubborn, compassionate, foolish people, and she shook her head slowly. "You're all going to get us killed," she said. "But I wouldn't have it any other way. All right, let's figure out how to handle tomorrow." They worked through the night, preparing arguments and strategies and backup plans. The hatchling slept peacefully in the med bay, unaware that its fate was being decided by forces far beyond its understanding. Danny slipped away once to check on it. He stood by the examination table and watched it breathe, watched its small chest rise and fall in the rhythm of life. "I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow," he whispered. "But I want you to know something. Whatever happens, I'm not giving up on you. I will fight for you. I will protect you. And if they want to take you, they're going to have to go through me first." The hatchling's eyes opened, as if it had heard him. Those pink eyes looked up at Danny with perfect trust. And Danny, a geologist from Nevada who had never expected to become a parent, made a silent vow that he intended to keep for the rest of his life. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. But tonight, in this small room on a hostile alien world, a man and a child had found each other. That was enough. Dawn came too quickly. Danny had barely slept, but he felt strangely alert as he took his position beside the outpost's main entrance. The rest of the team was scattered around the common room, trying to look calm and professional despite the tension that crackled in the air. Had decided to receive the delegation formally, as befitting representatives of the human race. She wore her best uniform and had practiced her diplomatic phrases until she could recite them in her sleep. She was as prepared as it was possible to be. The crawler sensors detected the approaching just as the first sun crested the horizon. There were 5 of them, walking in single file across the desert, their scales gleaming in the early light. They moved with the unhurried pace of beings who knew they held all the power in this situation. Danny watched them approach and felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. He forced himself to relax. Anger would not help anyone right now. The door opened, and they filed into the outpost. Their leader was an ancient male with faded gray scales and eyes that had seen centuries pass. Danny recognized him from the cultural files as Elder, one of the most respected leaders of the people. Behind came 4 other elders, 3 males and 1 female. The female was younger than the others, her scales still bright with color. Her name, according to the files, was, and she was considered something of a progressive among her people. Not that being progressive meant much when it came to albino hatchlings. "Greetings," said, stepping forward with her best diplomatic smile. "On behalf of the human research team, I welcome you to our outpost. We are honored by your visit." Elder made a sound that the translator rendered as something between a grunt and a snort. "We are not here for pleasantries, human. You have something that belongs to our people. We are here to take it back." "With respect, Elder, I'm not sure what you mean. Could you please clarify?" The old sneck frill flared with annoyance. "Do not play games with me. You know exactly what I mean. One of your kind took a sun-cursed hatchling from the breeding grounds. This is a violation of our laws and an insult to our traditions. The creature must be returned." Smile did not waver. "I see. You're referring to the injured hatchling that one of our team members found abandoned in the desert, the one that was left to die from dehydration and exposure." "It was not abandoned. It was being returned to the sands, as is proper. The sun-cursed have no place among our people." "Because of their coloring?" asked. Her voice was still polite, but Danny could hear the edge beneath it. "Because they look different from other. Because they are damaged, incomplete. Their souls cannot hold the light of our suns. They are born broken, and they must be returned to the earth so that their tainted spirits can be cleansed. This is our way. This has been our way for 10,000 generations." The words hung in the air, heavy and ancient and terrible. Danny felt sick to his stomach. How could anyone believe such things? How could anyone look at a baby and see only contamination? But then he thought about Earth. He thought about all the terrible things humans had done to each other over the centuries, all the bobbies who had been killed or abandoned because of their race or their gender or their disability. He thought about how recently those practices had ended in the grand scheme of things. They were not uniquely evil. They were simply struggling with the same darkness that every intelligent species seemed to carry within itself. That did not make what they did right, but it helped Danny understand that they were not monsters. They were just people trapped by beliefs they had never thought to question. "I understand your position," said carefully, "and I respect your traditions. However, I must be honest with you. We cannot return the hatchling." Frill flared again, more dramatically this time. "You refuse." "We do. In human culture, every life has value. We do not abandon our young, regardless of how they look. The hatchling was dying when our team member found it. He saved its life. To hand it over now, knowing what you intend to do, would violate everything we believe in." The old elder stared at for a long moment. His dark eyes were unreadable. "You would risk war between our peoples for a single defective creature." Danny stepped forward before could respond. He knew he should probably stay quiet and let the diplomats handle this, but he could not hold back any longer. "Not war," he said. We're not threatening anyone. We're simply saying that we won't participate in killing a child. You can do whatever you want to us. Expel us from your planet, cut off all contact. We'll accept those consequences, but we will not hand over a baby to be murdered. Turned his ancient eyes on Danny. You are the one who took it. I am. Why, what value does a sun-cursed creature have to your kind? It cannot work. It cannot fight. It cannot survive under our suns. What possible use could it serve? Danny thought about the question. He thought about his grandmother's stories, about Helen, about all the people throughout human history who had achieved greatness despite their differences. But somehow, those examples did not feel right. They made it sound like the hatchling needed to prove its worth, needed to accomplish something special to deserve life. It doesn't need to have any use, Danny said finally. It doesn't need to do anything or be anything special. It just needs to exist. That's enough. Every life has value simply because it exists. Not because of what it can do, but because of what it is. A life, a consciousness, a unique perspective on the universe that will never be repeated. He looked directly into Sai's eyes, refusing to look away. That hatchling is alive. It feels pain and fear and loneliness. It wants to live. That's all the reason I need to save it. I don't need it to be useful. I don't need it to prove anything. I just need it to be alive. Silence fell over the room. The elders exchanged glances that Danny could not interpret, even seemed thrown off balance by his words. It was who spoke next. Her voice was softer than the others, thoughtful. You truly believe this, that all life has equal value? Yes, Danny said, we do. Even the lives of beings who are not of your own species. Even those, life is precious wherever we find it. Tilted her head, studying Danny with those large, dark eyes. Your species is young. You have not yet learned how harsh the universe can be. Perhaps that is why you can afford such optimistic beliefs. Or perhaps, interjected gently, our youth allows us to see things that older species have forgotten how to notice. Another long silence, then made a sound that the translator could not quite interpret. It might have been frustration. It might have been something else. The sun-cursed creature has been touched by alien hands, he said at last. It is contaminated now. Even if we took it back, it could never be accepted among our people. The damage is done. He fixed Danny with a hard stare. You have made it your burden, human. May you find the weight bearable. He turned and walked toward the door. The other elders followed, though paused at the threshold. I will think about what you have said, she told Danny quietly. About the value of life, it is not what I expected to hear from your kind. Then she was gone, and the delegation disappeared into the desert dawn. Let out a breath she had been holding for what seemed like hours. Well, that went better than I expected. They're not going to try to take the hatchling back, Amy asked. Apparently not, though I'm not entirely sure why. The contamination thing was obviously an excuse, something we said got through to them. She looked at Danny. Especially you. Danny did not respond. He was already walking toward the med bay, eager to see the small white creature that had somehow changed everything. The hatchling was awake when he entered. It chirped happily at the sight of him, reaching out with all 4 arms. Danny lifted it gently and held it against his chest, feeling its small heart beating against his own. Hey there, he said softly. Good news, you get to stay with us. The hatchling made a contented sound and snuggled closer. It did not understand the words, but it understood the tone. It understood that it was safe and loved and wanted. For now, that was enough. Danny looked down at the tiny white face, at the pink eyes that were already starting to drift closed, and he smiled. I'm going to need to give you a name, he said thoughtfully. Can't keep calling you the hatchling forever. He thought about it for a moment. He thought about the darkness of the desert night, the fatting heat signature on his scanner, the desperate hope in those strange eyes when they first met. He thought about all the people throughout history who had been abandoned and rejected and left to die, but who had somehow survived to change the world. Hope, he said finally. I'm going to call you Hope. The hatchling, now named Hope, sighed contentedly in its sleep. And outside the outpost walls, the twin suns of Prime rose higher in the sky. bringing light to a world that had just, perhaps, begun to change. In the days that followed, the outpost slowly returned to something like normal routine. The supply run that Danny had abandoned was eventually completed. The research projects continued. Life went on. But nothing was quite the same. Hope grew stronger every day. Lisa was amazed at the speed of its recovery, documenting everything in case the information proved useful for future medical situations. The hatchling's burns healed, its organs stabilized, and its appetite became positively voracious. It ate everything Lisa gave it and demanded more with increasingly confident chirps and clicks. It also grew smarter. Within a week, Hope was responding to its name. Within 2 weeks, it was recognizing individual team members and greeting each of them with specific sounds. Within a month, it was attempting to mimic human speech, producing garbled but recognizable approximations of simple words. "Duh," it would say when Danny entered the room. "Duh, duh." Danny's heart melted every single time. "That's right," he would say, kneeling down to Hope's level. "I'm Danny, can you say Danny?" "Duh." "Close enough." The other team members fell in love with Hope too, who had initially been worried about the diplomatic consequences, found herself spending her evenings reading reports aloud while Hope curled up in her lap. Carlos built a special perch that allowed Hope to watch him work on the equipment without getting in the way. Amy and took turns teaching it simple games, laughing at its clumsy attempts to mimic their movements. Lisa remained focused on the scientific aspects, but even she could not resist Hope's charm. She would smile when the hatchling came to her with a skinned knee or a minor burn, patient and gentle as she treated each tiny injury. "You know," she said one evening, watching Hope play with a set of colored blocks that had made from spare parts, "I think this might be the juvenile ever recorded. Its learning curve is remarkable." "Maybe albinos aren't as damaged as the think," Danny suggested. "Maybe not, or maybe Hope is just exceptional. Either way, it's going to be fascinating to watch it grow up." Danny watched Hope carefully stack the blocks into a tower, then knock it down with a triumphant shriek. The hatchling immediately began building again, apparently determined to make the tower even higher this time. "Yeah," he said softly, "it really is." Word of Hope's survival spread across Prime, though the humans did not know how. They had their own communication networks, their own ways of sharing information, and news of the albino raised by aliens traveled quickly through those channels. Most dismissed the story with disgust. The Sun-Cursed were an embarrassment, and any human foolish enough to adopt one was clearly defective themselves. Let the strange, soft creatures waste their time on damaged goods. It was no concern of proper. But some, especially among the younger generation, found themselves curious. They had heard the elders' reports about the human who had spoken so passionately about the value of life. They had heard about Hope's rapid recovery, its unusual intelligence, its apparent happiness. These young began to ask questions that made their elders uncomfortable. Why were the Sun-Cursed considered damaged? What evidence proved that their souls were incomplete? Had anyone ever actually raised an albino to adulthood to see what it might become? The elders had no good answers. They had only tradition, only faith, only the certainty that what had always been done was what should always be done. But for the first time, that certainty was being challenged. The young elder who had visited the human outpost found herself thinking about those questions more and more. She had been raised to believe everything her people taught about the Sun-Cursed. She had accepted those beliefs without hesitation, as every good did. But the human's words haunted her. Every life has value simply because it exists, not because of what it can do, but because of what it is. Was that true? Could that be true? She did not know, but for the first time in her long life, she wanted to find out. Months passed. Hope grew. It learned to walk steadily, then to run, then to climb with an agility that surprised everyone. It learned to speak, first in broken English, then with increasing fluency. It asked questions constantly, wanting to know everything about everything. "What is that?" it would ask, pointing at a piece of equipment. "That's a spectrometer," Danny would explain. "It tells us what things are made of." How does it work? It shines light on something and measures how the light bounces back. Can I try? And Danny would show Hope how to use the spectrometer, watching with pride as the small white creature carefully followed his instructions. Hope was a natural scientist, curious and methodical and endlessly patient. It would spend hours examining a single rock, learning everything there was to learn about it. Lisa developed a special UV filtering compound that protected Hope's sensitive skin from the brutal sunlight. With this protection, Hope could venture outside during the dimmer evening hours, exploring the desert around the outpost with wide-eyed wonder. It was on one of these excursions that Hope found its first friend. Danny was supervising from a distance, keeping an eye on Hope while it investigated an interesting rock formation, when he noticed movement on the ridge above them. A young, barely older than Hope itself, was watching them with obvious curiosity. Danny tensed, ready to grab Hope and run if necessary. But the young did not seem hostile. It was just watching, its dark eyes wide with fascination. Hope noticed the watcher too. Instead of being afraid, it waved one of its small hands in greeting. "Hello," it called out. "I am Hope. What is your name?" The young hesitated for a moment. Then, slowly, it began to make its way down the ridge toward them. Danny wanted to intervene, wanted to put himself between Hope and this stranger. But something held him back. This was Hope's moment, Hope's choice. He would not take it away. The young stopped a few feet from Hope. It was larger than the hatchling, probably a few months older, and its green and brown scales marked it as completely normal by standards. But there was nothing hostile in its posture, only curiosity. "I am," it said, using the clicks and chirps of the language. "I have never seen a sun-cursed one before. I thought you would be different." Hope tilted its head. "Different how?" "I do not know, scary maybe, or sick, but you look normal, just white." "I am normal," Hope said simply. "I am just me." Considered this for a moment. Then it made a sound that the translator rendered as a laugh. "You talk funny, like a human." "I was raised by humans," Hope explained. "Danny saved me when I was a baby. He is my father now." Looked at Danny with new interest. "The human is your father, but he looks nothing like you." "Family is not about looking the same. Family is about who loves you and takes care of you." Hope smiled, a very human expression that it had learned from watching Danny. "The humans taught me that." The young seemed to think about this. Then it sat down in the sand beside Hope, as if they had been friends for years. "Tell me about the humans," it said. "Tell me everything." And Hope did. Danny watched from a distance as the two young creatures talked and played and laughed together. He felt tears pricking at his eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. Hope was not alone anymore. It had found a friend, a connection to its own species, a bridge between the world it was born into and the world it had been raised in. Maybe, Danny thought, this was how change happened, not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through small moments of connection, through children meeting children, through friendship overcoming prejudice. Maybe Hope really was going to change the world. He smiled and settled back to watch, content to let the future unfold one small miracle at a time. Back at the outpost that evening, Hope told everyone about its new friend. "His name is," it said excitedly, bouncing from one team member to another. "He is nice. He wants to learn about humans. He said he will come back tomorrow to play." Exchanged a look with Danny. "Is that a good idea? Won't his family be upset?" Said his parents do not care where he goes as long as he is back before dark. He is the fifth child in his clutch. They do not pay much attention to him. There was something sad in Hope's voice as it said this, as if it understood something about situation that the humans did not. Danny felt a pang of sympathy for this young who had been effectively abandoned by parents who had too many children to love them all properly. "Well," he said, "if wants to visit, we should probably make him feel welcome. Maybe we could show him around the outpost. What do you think?" Hope's pink eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? You would do that?" "Of course, any friend of yours is a friend of ours." Hope launched itself at Danny, wrapping all four arms around him in a fierce hug. The force of the embrace nearly knocked him off his feet, but he just laughed and hugged back. "Thank you, Danny," Hope whispered. "Thank you for everything." "Always," he promised, "always." True to its word, returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Within a week, the young was a regular presence at the outpost, fascinated by everything human. He asked endless questions about human technology, human culture, human history. He wanted to know how their vehicles worked, what their food tasted like, why they wore clothes when did not need them. He was curious and open-minded and utterly without prejudice. The team welcomed him warmly, saw in him an opportunity to build bridges with the people. Lisa was excited to study juvenile development up close. Carlos was delighted to have someone new to show off his engineering projects, too. Amy treated him like a second adoptive nephew, right alongside Hope. And Danny watched it all with a heart full of hope. This was how it started, he thought. One child at a time, one friendship at a time, one small step toward understanding. The world might not change overnight, but it was changing, he could feel it. And it had all begun with a desperate, rejected albino hatchling sitting alone in the sand, waiting for someone to see it. Someone had seen, and everything was different now.